Could the Muggle military actually beat the wizarding world? Roughly 3,000 wizards going up against 2.81 million members of the United States military alone. That's not even counting NATO, China, Russia, or any other country on Earth. And yet, somehow, this is still a genuinely close fight. And if you've ever wondered who would win in a real no-holds-barred war between the wizarding world and modern Muggle militaries, the answer is way more complicated than you'd expect. Today we're breaking down whether today's Muggle military, with its hypersonic missiles, AI-controlled drone swarms, nuclear arsenals, and a defense budget approaching $1 trillion, could actually defeat the wizarding world. The same wizarding world that, at its most desperate, threw everything it had into the Battle of Hogwarts and nearly lost anyway. I'll be honest with you, the answer is way more complicated than you'd expect. Not only that, we'll talk through different scenarios and every what-if option out there so we can finally solve this for good. But before we get to the good stuff, guns, explosions, Avada Muggle Davra, there are 3 important pieces we need to cover. And the first and most obvious one is the numbers. J.K. Rowling herself stated that there are about 3,000 witches and wizards in all of Britain. Some fan calculations push that number up to maybe 5,600 if you account for wizard lifespans stretching to 140 years. Globally, the most generous estimates put the entire worldwide wizarding population somewhere between 800,000 and 2.6 million. Let's be extremely generous and call it 2.6 million magical people on the entire planet. The United States military alone has 2.81 million personnel. That's one country matching the entire global wizarding population with just its military. Not its civilian population, not its allies, just the people currently employed to fight wars. The active duty force sits at 1.3 million, with reserves bringing it to 2.1 million, plus over 700,000 civilian defense employees. And what does that force have at its disposal? The U.S. Air Force operates roughly 13,000 aircraft, first in the world, including over 1,800 fighter jets and more than 5,000 helicopters. On the ground, you're looking at 4,657 main battle tanks, nearly 40,000 armored vehicles, and about 1,500 artillery pieces. On the water, 11 aircraft carriers, which is more than every other nation on Earth combined. The current defense budget approaches $1 trillion, the largest in American history, and it's expected to cross that line in the next few years. The Department of Defense administers all of it, making it the single largest institutional military apparatus the planet has ever seen. Hagrid once said most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married Muggles, we'd have died out. He wasn't making a political point, he was stating a demographic reality. The wizarding world is tiny, and it's shrinking. The low number of students in Harry's year at Hogwarts likely reflects a crash in birth rate during Voldemort's terror campaign. This is a civilization that can barely sustain its own population, going up against the most heavily armed species in the history of the planet. So we've covered the first important piece. Now let's get into the second. Raw numbers only tell half the story. The wizarding world never industrialized. While Muggles spent centuries building factories, railways, and eventually satellites, wizards solved the same problems with spells and called it a day. Need to travel? Apparate. Need light? Lumos. Need to build something? Conjure it. Magic made innovation unnecessary, which means it also made large-scale coordination unnecessary. The wizarding world has nothing resembling an assembly line, a logistics network, or centralized manufacturing. Every magical solution is individual, powered by a single wand. That works beautifully in peacetime. In a war of attrition against an industrial civilization that can produce 10,000 drones in a month, it becomes a fatal weakness. Wizards can do extraordinary things one at a time. Muggles can do ordinary things 1,000,000 at a time. And war historically favors the million. The magical world also has almost no experience thinking in terms of systems. Muggle militaries operate through layered command structures, redundant communications, and doctrine refined across centuries of large-scale conflict. The wizarding world's largest battle involved a few hundred people defending a single building. Their idea of military coordination is Dumbledore's army, a school club run by a teenager. The magical world lacks a war college, staff offices trained in logistics, and doctrine for sustained operations. If the conflict drags past the first few weeks, this gap in institutional thinking becomes as dangerous as any technological advantage the Muggles hold. On paper, this should be the most one-sided fight imaginable. A small town versus a superpower. Game over, right? Not even close, because magic breaks every rule that modern warfare is built on. So, we've covered the first two important pieces. Now the third and final one before we get to the juicy part. Magic breaks every rule modern warfare is built on. I know you want the fire, the explosions, all of that, and we'll get to it in a minute. Take the Fidelius Charm. The single spell might be the most overpowered defensive ability in any fictional universe, and that includes force fields, cloaking devices, all of it. The Fidelius Charm hides a secret inside a living person's soul, unless you pick the wrong secret keeper, right, Sirius? A location protected by it becomes invisible, intangible, unplottable, and soundproof. Dumbledore explained it perfectly. As long as the secret keeper refused to speak, you know who could search the village where Lily and James were staying for years and never find them. Not even if he had his nose pressed against their sitting room window. Think about what that means in military terms. You cannot target what you cannot find. Every smart bomb, every cruise missile, every GPS-guided munition in the American arsenal becomes completely useless against a location protected by the Fidelius Charm. The Fidelius Charm makes a location functionally non-existent to anyone outside the secret. Invisible to every satellite, untraceable by any drone, silent to any radar frequency ever invented. Every satellite, drone, and radar system on the planet comes back with nothing. The location simply doesn't exist in any detectable way. And that's just one spell. Magic also interferes with the functionality of Muggle technology powered by electricity, computers, radar, bugging devices. None of them work in environments saturated with magic, like Hogwarts. This matters enormously to a modern military that runs entirely on electronics. Fighter jets have fly-by-wire systems, tanks rely on computerized targeting, communications run through encrypted digital networks. A wizard projecting a field that fries electronics has just turned a $70 million F-35 built by Lockheed Martin into a very expensive lawn ornament. That's essentially a targeted electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, and it costs exactly $0 to cast. Then there's the Muggle repelling charm, Repello Muggletum, which causes any non-magical person approaching a wizarding location to suddenly remember an urgent appointment and walk away, forgetting why they came. Imagine trying to lead a ground assault when your soldiers keep wandering off because they suddenly felt like they left the oven on. You can't fight an enemy when your own troops psychologically cannot approach the battlefield. But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's run some actual scenarios. Scenario 1. The Muggles strike first. Say the Muggle world discovers the wizarding world and immediately decides it's a threat. The military's greatest advantage here is speed and overwhelming force before wizards can react. And right now, that speed is genuinely terrifying. The US Army's Dark Eagle hypersonic missile became operational this year. It flies at Mach 5 or greater while maneuvering unpredictably through the atmosphere. Russia's Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle reportedly hits Mach 27, roughly 20,000 miles per hour. At those speeds, a strike on a target in Britain arrives in under 5 minutes. Hypersonic weapons have fundamentally changed global deterrence doctrine because they compress response time from half an hour to practically nothing. Could a hypersonic first strike take out the wizarding world? If wizards had a known fixed location with no magical protections, absolutely. Hogwarts, Diagon Alley, the Ministry of Magic, all gone before anyone could raise a wand. But wizards don't operate like a conventional enemy. Their critical locations are already hidden behind layers of magical concealment. The Ministry of Magic sits underground. Hogwarts is unplottable. And the moment wizards realized they were under attack, Fidelius charms would go up on everything that matters. The real question isn't whether that first strike would be devastating. It would be. The question is whether it would be decisive. And the answer is almost certainly no, because you can't decapitate a society that has no centralized infrastructure you can actually see. Scenario 2. The Long War. This is where things get genuinely ugly for the Muggles. If the wizarding world survives that initial strike and goes underground, you're now fighting a guerrilla war against an enemy whose abilities make the most elite special forces on Earth look like amateurs. And here's the thing about wizarding guerrilla warfare. We've already seen it work. Voldemort's Death Eaters at their peak destabilized an entire government, infiltrated the Ministry of Magic itself, and nearly collapsed magical Britain's institutions within a single year. They weren't fighting with superior numbers. They were fighting with superior tactics, terror, and infiltration. Now imagine those same methods directed outward against a Muggle military that has no frame of reference for any of it. Apparition. Wizards can teleport instantly, anywhere, with no vehicle, no aircraft, no runway, no supply line. A wizard can appear inside the Pentagon, cast 3 spells, and vanish before anyone in the room processes what happened. How do you fight an enemy that can materialize anywhere on the planet and disappear in the same breath? Polyjuice Potion lets a wizard become anyone, perfectly, down to their voice, their fingerprints, their retinal scan. Your commanding general could be replaced by a wizard wearing his face and nobody would know for months. Every security protocol in the modern military assumes that people are who they appear to be. Polyjuice Potion makes that assumption catastrophically wrong. And then there's the Imperious Curse, direct mind control. A wizard doesn't need to infiltrate your command structure when they can simply put your generals under magical compulsion and have them issue whatever orders serve the wizarding world's interests. Launch codes, troop movements, stand down orders, all accessible through a single curse on the right person. There's something else people overlook. Warfare is logistics. A single Witcher wizard could disrupt the entire supply chain of a modern military by warding a few key roads or railway junctions. Magic barriers on the approaches to airports, naval bases, ammunition depots. Suddenly your billion-dollar military machine can't refuel, can't resupply, can't even move. And the wizard who set those wards, already somewhere else, doing the same thing to another checkpoint. Anyone who attended Hogwarts, even the mediocre students, could wreak absolute havoc using nothing but basic pranking spells. You don't need to be Dumbledore to be a nightmare for conventional forces. You just need to turn invisible, teleport, and make things explode. And wizards have assets beyond wands. Dragons, for one. A single Hungarian horntail is essentially a biological fighter jet. Armored, airborne, and capable of sustained fire that melts stone. The Gringotts dragon that Harry freed in Deathly Hallows had been chained underground for decades, and still flew across half of England on adrenaline alone. Now imagine a dozen of those, unleashed deliberately against a military airfield. Anti-aircraft missiles might bring one down eventually, but the chaos a dragon causes in the first 60 seconds, fires destroyed aircraft on the tarmac. Sheer psychological terror would be devastating, and dragons are just the obvious example. Acromantulas behind enemy lines, thestrals for invisible air transport. House elves who can apparate through almost any magical barrier and are fanatically loyal, functioning as the ultimate covert operatives. The magical world's military potential extends far beyond wand-wielding humans. There is also the matter of psychological warfare, and here wizards hold a terrifying advantage. Memory charms can erase specific knowledge from a person's mind entirely. A captured soldier could be interrogated, drained of everything useful, and sent back to base remembering nothing, not even that they were captured. The Confundus charm creates temporary confusion severe enough to compromise decision-making in critical moments. And Legilimency, the magical ability to read minds, makes conventional interrogation resistance training completely useless. Muggle militaries train soldiers to withstand physical and psychological pressure. They have absolutely zero preparation for any enemy that can simply reach into your head and take what it needs. And then there are Dementors, creatures that drain every positive emotion from a person and, given enough exposure, leave them an empty shell. Muggle soldiers have no concept of this threat and zero defense against it. The Patronus charm is the only known counter, and it requires a level of emotional focus that most trained wizards struggle with under pressure. Deploy a swarm of Dementors over a military base, and within hours you have an entire garrison too paralyzed by despair to operate a radio, let alone a weapons system. Terrifying? Absolutely, but Muggles have answers to all of this. Scenario 3. The technology catches up. Modern military technology includes capabilities that would genuinely terrify even the most powerful wizards. Drone swarms, for one. DARPA developed fully autonomous drone constellations, what the Pentagon now calls Collaborative Combat Aircraft, or CCA. Up to 500 aircraft operating with decentralized AI coordination. They don't need GPS, they use inertial navigation, visual positioning, and onboard AI models. They function in electronically denied environments. In January of this year, the Department of Defense used an AI-enabled drone swarm in a kinetic attack during a military exercise in Florida. One drone led 3 others in a synchronized assault on targets. The Pentagon Pentagon is offering vendors up to $100 million to scale this technology further, and these swarms operate with minimal central control, making them resilient to jamming. Magic might fry electronics in high magic environments, but what about 1,000 cheap drones approaching from outside that interference radius, each one carrying a small explosive payload? You can't cast Protego against 500 simultaneous attacks from every direction. A shield charm might stop one threat, maybe 10. 500 arriving simultaneously from a mile out? That's a completely different problem. Then there's AI. Palantir's Titan system, the Army's AI-powered battlefield intelligence platform, processes satellite feeds in seconds and predicts enemy movements with 92% accuracy. Tested in actual Red Sea operations in 2025. The Boeing F-47, the first sixth-generation fighter ever built, anchors American air superiority for the next 4 decades. Lockheed Martin's Helios laser, mounted on the destroyer USS Preble, already shot down 4 drones at sea, a 60 kilowatt and a cost of a few dollars per shot, compared to a $2 million interceptor missile. The Pentagon has since contracted a 500 kilowatt version designed to take out cruise missiles and entire drone swarms once operational. Some particularly sharp Muggle strategists have also noticed something fascinating. If magic interferes with technology, then technology can detect magic. That interference presents as anomalous electromagnetic disruption, an EMP-like signature, similar to a solar flare, and those are things we already know how to detect. Set up antenna towers across the country, look for blank spots where radio waves behave strangely, and you've just located every hidden magical site in Britain. You can't hide from physics. Now, one detail that rarely gets discussed, the Muggle world already has passive detection systems that would accidentally reveal magical locations. Cell tower networks, commercial aviation radar, even weather satellite infrared imaging. All of these systems generate continuous maps of electromagnetic activity. A Muggle repelling charm around Hogwarts might keep people away, but it would also create a conspicuous dead zone in data coverage. Intelligence analysts look for exactly these kind of anomalies. A perfectly circular gap in cell phone pings or a patch of countryside where no commercial flight ever routes would be a red flag visible from any standard intelligence dashboard. The magical world's own defenses, in other words, could become its most detectable signature. The question of magical healing adds another layer. Wizards have access to medical magic that borders on miraculous. Regrowing bones overnight, mending wounds in seconds, curing conditions that Muggle medicine still considers permanent. In a prolonged conflict, this becomes a genuine force multiplier. A wizard injured in a skirmish could be back in action within hours, while a Muggle soldier with comparable injuries faces weeks or months of recovery. Multiply that across hundreds of engagements, and the wizarding side effectively recycles its tiny fighting force, far more efficiently than any Muggle field hospital could match. Scenario 4. The nuclear option. This is the conversation nobody wants to have, but everyone thinks about. 9 countries possess roughly 12,000 nuclear warheads at last count. The United States alone holds 5,428. Average yield per warhead runs around 300 to 500 kilotons. For reference, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. The Fidelius charm can make a location invisible, but it can't make it indestructible. Narrow down the general area where wizards are hiding, and you don't need a precise address. A nuclear weapon doesn't need to hit a specific building. It erases everything within miles. You can't Protego a nuclear fireball. You can't repello Muggletum, a blast wave traveling at the speed of sound. Thermal radiation alone vaporizes everything within the kill radius, regardless of whether you can see the target. But this is mutually assured insanity. Using nuclear weapons to fight a few thousand wizards means destroying your own cities, your own people, your own infrastructure. No rational government does this unless they're already losing badly. And if you're nuking your own territory to fight an enemy you can't see, you've already lost in every way that matters. Scenario 5. The last resort. Okay, so this is where it gets serious. Literally. Wizards are losing, they're desperate, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to survive. So, what if every surviving witch and wizard starts creating Horcruxes? Yeah, the darkest magic in existence. The one thing even Voldemort kept secret. But here's the thing, the worst part of making a Horcrux, the killing is already happening on both sides. Wizards are dying, Muggles are dying, and at some point a few desperate witches and wizards are going to think, Why not use this horror to our advantage? A wizard with a Horcrux can't be permanently killed by any conventional weapon. Shoot them, bomb them, vaporize the building they're standing in. Their soul fragment survives in a hidden object somewhere, and given enough time, they'll come back. Imagine trying to win a war against an enemy that literally cannot stay dead. Every wizard you kill eventually returns, angrier and with nothing left to lose. Maybe even their nose, right, Voldy? The Muggle military has no framework for an enemy that treats death as a temporary inconvenience. So, who actually wins? Well, here's the honest answer, and it's the one that frustrates people because it isn't clean. In a prolonged total war, Muggles almost certainly win the conventional conflict. The industrial capacity, the numbers, the sheer weight of military hardware is simply too much for a few thousand wizards to overcome in open battle. Wizards have no experience with large-scale warfare. Their biggest conflict, the Battle of Hogwarts, involved maybe a few hundred people fighting in a single school. Muggles have spent centuries perfecting the art of killing each other on an industrial scale. Total eradication of wizards, though, virtually impossible. They're too slippery. And even if a handful of them resorted to Horcruxes, eradication becomes literally impossible. You'd have to find and destroy every hidden soul fragment on the planet before a single wizard stays dead for good. Apparition, the Fidelius charm, disillusionment, 1,000 concealment methods that make them functionally invisible to any detection system. As one analysis put it, Muggles are never going to fully eradicate wizards. What does winning even look like in a war like this? If the Muggle definition is total elimination of the magical threat, that requires finding every single wizard on Earth, including ones hidden behind spells designed to make them unfindable. If the wizarding definition is forcing Muggles to submit to magical rule, that requires controlling 8 billion people with a population smaller than a mid-sized suburb. Both definitions of victory are practically impossible. The real deciding factor, the one that could swing this entire conflict, is timing. If wizards strike first using the Imperius Curse on key military leaders, infiltrating command structures with Polyjuice Potion, and disabling nuclear launch capabilities before the Muggle world even understands what's happening, they could theoretically win. Grindelwald understood this, and that's exactly why he wanted to subjugate Muggles before their weapons technology advanced too far. He saw the writing on the wall decades before nuclear weapons even existed. There's one more factor that almost nobody talks about enough: Muggle-born wizards. Half-bloods who grew up in both worlds, people who understand military technology and magic simultaneously. In a war between the two civilizations, these individuals become the most valuable assets on either side. A Muggle-born witch who served in the Royal Air Force would see vulnerabilities invisible to either side alone. Whichever side recruits more of these crossover people gains an enormous strategic edge, because they speak both languages, wands and weapons. The most likely outcome, wizards survive but retreat deeper into hiding than ever before. The Statute of Secrecy protects Muggles from a truth they can't process, and protects wizards from a war they can't survive in the open. And maybe that's the whole point all along. The greatest trick the wizarding world ever pulled was convincing the Muggle world it didn't exist, because the moment that illusion shatters, everything changes. With hypersonic missiles, AI drone swarms, and a $1 trillion war machine, it changes in ways that no amount of magic can fully overcome. Wizards wouldn't lose, but they'd never truly win either. Not a decisive victory for either side, just an endless invisible war fought in shadows, where the most powerful military on Earth can't even find an enemy that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Now, if the wizarding world had bothered to build a single tank, this whole debate would be over. But the wizarding world never developed technology. Why, you ask? Well, that's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before a wizard obliviates your recommendations.